Sorry, guys, we're still on family relationships. This is part two. There was an issue with the iPad, so moving on. We left off on secure attachment in adolescence and emerging adulthood and the effects on adolescence. So, higher self esteem and well being, better psychological and physical health, closer relationships with friends and romantic partners, and more autonomous and self reliant. The effects on emerging adults, you see a higher educational and occupational attainment. Lower psychological problems, lower drug use. Now, a lot of times people report their relationship with their parents when they're adolescents as stressful, and even G. Stanley Hall and Anna Freud believed it was a time of storm and stress. But since the 60s, that kind of got dispelled. But anyway, both G. Stanley Hall and Anna Freud both researchers made it sound as though it was universal and inevitable that all adolescents rebel against their parents, and that all parents and adolescents experience intense conflict for many years. Studies in the 60s dispelled the stereotype of the storm and stress and found that most adolescents like, trust, and admired their parents. Disagreements are usually about minor issues like hairstyle, curfew, things like that. Adolescents and their parents agree on many of the most important aspects of the views of life. Conflicts with parents increase, though, sharply in early adolescence and remain high for several years. In some cases, but not all. Conflict in adolescence is especially frequent and intense between mother and daughters. It's only in late adolescence and emerging adulthood that conflict with parents diminishes substantially. Reasons for conflicts in early adolescence? Well, biological changes. Now the adolescent has become bigger and stronger physically, makes it more difficult for parents to impose their authority by virtue of their greater physical presence, for instance. And of course, cognitive changes. An increased ability for thinking abstractly and with more complexity makes the adolescents better arguers, and it becomes more difficult for parents to prevail quickly in arguments with their children. Culture and conflict with parents. Well, conflict is not universal or natural. Biological and cognitive changes take place among adolescents in all cultures. Parent-adolescent conflict is not typical in all cultures. Conflicts in traditional cultures, for instance, it's rare for parents and adolescents to engage in the kind of frequent petty conflicts typical of parent-adolescent relationships in the American majority culture. Reason? Well, economics, for instance. In non-industrialized traditional cultures, family members tend to rely a great deal on each other economically. And cultural beliefs about parental authority and the appropriate degree of adolescents' independence. We know in traditional cultures, independence is not key in their cultures. It's more about the family, the community. Remember, we're looking at collectivist cultures here. Parents and emerging adults. Relationships between the parents and their emerging adults improves once the young person leaves home. Emerging adults report greater closeness and report fewer negative feelings towards their parents after moving. Those at least an hour away by car from their parents reported higher levels of closeness to their parents, valued their parents' opinion most highly. Those who remained home, on the other hand, reported poorest relationships with their families or with their parents in these respects. Now, one of the things I'll say is if you're still living at home with your parents and you're not paying rent, stay as long as you can. Paying a mortgage or rent stinks. Okay, living at home in the U.S., most emerging adults move out of their parents' home in their late teens. About 30% stay home through their early 20s. Staying at home is more common among Latinos, African and Asian Americans than among white Americans. About 40% of American emerging adults return to the nest at least once. A lot of times it might happen right after college if they've gone away to college. Living at home in Europe, on the other hand, the emerging adults tend to live with their parents longer than in the U.S. European university students are more likely than American students to live at home. Emerging adults who don't attend university may have difficulty finding or affording an apartment, so they'll stay at home. European cultural values emphasize support within the family while allowing young people substantial autonomy. There have been a lot of historical changes over the last 2 centuries. For instance, lower birth rate. Today, the average number of children is 2. In the 1800s, women in the U.S. had an average of 8 children. Could you imagine 8 kids? Woof. Longer life expectancy. Until about 1900, the average life expectancy was about 45. Now the average is over 70. Moving from rural to urban residents. As recently as 1830, 70% of children lived in farm families. By 1930, this figure had dropped to 30%. And today it's at less than 2%. Some other historical changes over the last 50 years. Divorce rate. Nearly half of the current generation of young people are projected to experience their parents' divorce by the time they reach their late teens. Single-parent households. Mothers represent 90% of custodial parenting, or parents, I should say. There's also been a rise in the proportion of children born outside of marriage. Dual earner families, for instance. Now it's almost impossible to have somebody stay home with the children. Now, because of the economy, two people need to work. Employment among women with school-age children has increased from about 25% to over 75%. Divorce. Let's go back to divorce, for instance. The effect on kids. Young people whose parents have divorced are higher risk for a wide variety of negative outcomes like behavioral problems, psychological distress, lower academic achievement, higher rates of drug and alcohol use, initiation of sexual intercourse at an earlier age, depression and withdrawal, anxiety, less likely to attend college. In emerging adults, the effects of parental divorce are evident in greater problems in forming close relationships or close romantic relationships. Weariness of entering marriage, and they're determined to avoid divorce. So you got each side of the spectrum here. So maybe don't want to get married, or if they're married, they fight to keep the marriage going. Effects of divorce, the family process factors. Exposure of conflict between parents. Exposure to parents' conflict more than the specific event of divorce is especially damaging. A lot of times one parent might blame the other parent and tell the kids or talk to the kids about it. If I'm dealing with a family and the parents are fighting constantly in front of the kids, they're better off getting divorced or at least separating away from each other because the conflict is not good for the kids. Effects of parenting practices. Divorce is stressful and painful to most of the adults who experience it, and it affects their role as parents. Increase in economic stress. Money is tight in mother-headed households. The mother-headed household, a lot of times the income drops by an average of 40 to 50%. Now, they've gotten divorced. Now one wants to get remarried. Well, adolescents typically take a turn for the worse when their mothers remarry, for instance. So adolescents in step families have a greater likelihood of depression, anxiety, conduct disorders, lower academic achievement, engaging in delinquent activities. Now, the effect of the single-parent household. So as with divorce, adolescents in never-married single-parent households are at greater risk for lower school achievement, depression, anxiety, substance use, early initiation of sexual activity. Now, both parents are married. They're married together with the family, and both have to work. So let's look at the effect of the dual-earned family. So, effects on the girls. They're often quite positive. They tend to be more confident, higher career aspirations. The effects on the boys, on the other hand, a little different. They're more negative than the girls. So, more arguments with their mothers and siblings, poorer school performance for boys in middle and upper middle class families. So there can be issues when both parents are working and there's not as much supervision. Okay, abuse in the family. I deal with this a lot where kids have been abused in my therapy. So a lot of times I'm seeing both sides of it for both males and females too. So abused adolescents tend to be more aggressive in their interactions with their peers, are more likely to engage in antisocial behavior and substance use, are more likely to be depressed and anxious, and perform more poorly in school. Factors that are related to physical abuse. Abusive parents were more likely to have been abused themselves. A lot of kids that have been abused as children, a lot of times may get involved in abusive relationships or become abusers themselves because it's what's common to them. Family stresses or problems in parents' lives, for instance, increase the likelihood of possible abuse. Parents tend to be more poorly skilled at parenting. It's pretty interesting. You have to take classes to get married in certain religions. You need to take classes to learn to drive a car. You don't need to take classes to be a parent. Sometimes you do when you're going through a divorce, but other than that, anybody can have a child. Nobody has to have parenting classes. Sexual abuse in adolescence or sexually abused adolescents have difficulty trusting others and forming intimate relationships. Experience depression, high anxiety, and social withdrawal. They may become either highly avoidant or highly avoidant of sexual contact, or highly promiscuous. Higher risk of psychological disorders, substance abuse, suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Sexual abusers feel inadequate in their relationships with adults. They prefer to seek sexual satisfaction from children who are easier to control. Okay, running away from home. You've all probably done it or thought about it at one point when you didn't get what you wanted as a kid. But about 1 million adolescents actually do run away from home each year in the U.S. About a fourth of those are throwaways. Their parents force them to leave, for instance. Adolescents who run away have often experienced high conflict with their parents. Many have experienced physical or sexual abuse. Adolescents who run away tend to be highly vulnerable to exploitation, for instance. Now, talking about all over the world, street children around the world, as many as 100 million or more children worldwide. Why these children are on the street? It could be family dysfunction, poverty, war, family breakdown due to AIDS, parents' substance abuse, physical and sexual abuse, all tied in here, could be affecting why kids are running away. It's pretty sad that we have this many worldwide that have run away or are on their own. So again, family relationships is key, is important, but it can affect in positive and negative ways. Way a parent parents their children can affect the children in many ways, positive or negative. The more involved a parent is in the kid's life, the better results or better end result for them. But that is family relationships. Any questions, concerns, please put it on Canvas, ask me, send me an email, whatever. And I will see you guys on the next lecture. See you later, guys.